Hey, thank you so much, Susan, for coming on. We're really excited to hear from you and your perspective. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for having me. These are such important conversations, and I'm really honored to be a part of them. So thank you for having me. So yeah, about me. Well, I'm a mom of three, a single mom of three. They're all teenagers now, so that's been a little gray. And I was a kindergarten. Well, I started in nursery, and then I moved to kindergarten. So I was a teacher for many years. And I also did some reading remediation. I got my master's in that, so there was a sort of a focus on that. We didn't at the school at the time have a literacy specialist. Now I see that a lot more, and it's so important. So as the classroom teacher, that was part of the role. But I didn't mind because I was a crazy picture book collector. I love picture books. They're so powerful. You know, they break these big messages down into like easy, palatable pieces. So I did that for many years. And then I had my children. And then I took some time off from being in the classroom. And during that time, I had always had a yoga and mindfulness practice of my own. And I started to sort of see how that could be potentially really helpful for kids. So I did all kinds of trainings to become certified in teaching yoga and mindfulness, particularly in the school system to kids, to kind of meet them where they're at in terms of stressors and things like that. And that was a slow start because places were hesitant, but people are opening up a bit more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful for that. And then all the while I was writing, but mostly writing for myself. And at a certain point, I had this stack of stuff that I'd written for kids. And I took a workshop that was being run by Peter Reynolds, who many people might be familiar with. He's an author, illustrator himself. And he pulled a story out of my pile and said, I'd like to illustrate this. And after, pinching myself and looking at my shoulder, I'm like, what? We put together a dummy and it sold, and just things kind of took off from there. And now this is my career. But thankfully, when I go to visit schools and things like that, I get to bring in my yoga, my mindfulness, my teaching, all of that good stuff. So it's really the best of all worlds for me.
So you definitely get to pull in all of those interests and those hobbies.
Yeah,
That is
really,
amazing.
really
I
good.
know a lot of your books are actually illustrated by Peter Reynolds. Was that connection kind of made through those initial starts?
Yes. When we first did our first book together was The Museum, and once we sold that, I got his agent signed me, and the Abrams Publishing wanted us to do more books together. And I had already written some things and given them to him, and he was already sort of working on them. But it became this real collaborative, wonderful relationship. So Abrams is our main publisher, although we published The Water Princess with Putnam. But yeah, so that's been sort of an ongoing, lovely relationship that's been, growing and expanding throughout the years. But it started at that one.
Absolutely. That's really wonderful, because I know a lot of authors, they receive like illustrators who, sign on to do their work, or they're using multiple, but to have that connection, I'm
It's been,
sure
yeah, I've been really fortunate. And also it's been very interesting because typically, as you're saying, if you're the author, you don't bring your illustrator, you don't suggest your illustrator. The publisher will come to you with perhaps a few choices, and you get to talk about those. But you are not the one choosing the illustrator. So it's been a rare and really unique and wonderful experience. And then the other books, like My Kicks and all those other books, the other illustrators, some of them I've never even met still. So it's a really interesting process.
absolutely. Have you always been interested in reading and writing?
I have. I mean, my parents always had books around, and so visually that was just something that was part of my everyday. It was really, I think, my brother. We were typical latchkey kids, so we lived in Manhattan in the West Village, and we were just managing by ourselves a little bit. Sorry, Mom. And so after school, my brother loved to read. He's 2 years older than me, and he would take me to the library and we would read, and that would be our way of bonding and, feeling safe. And so it was something that was always there, the reading. The writing started out, I always wrote things, but they were more, diaries or journals or observations, things like that. It wasn't until I was a lot older that I started to actually write stories.
Okay. I know you said that you've always had this mindfulness or yoga practice, and now you're bringing that into schools and with children. Is that what inspired your most current works with the IM?
Yeah, that's what started the IM series. The first in the series was IM Yoga, and we didn't start out even thinking about it as a series. It was just it felt like a natural story to be writing. And I wanted to communicate not so much instruction, but how yoga makes us feel. And so that inspired that book. But it's all the mindfulness and yoga and awareness kind of weaves its way into all of the stories. But there's a lot of it in the IM series, especially with the meditations in the back and things like that.
That's really interesting. So we decided to highlight My Kicks. And My Kicks is the story of a young boy that needs a new pair of shoes, and he's very hesitant about getting a new pair and just really fearful of losing like those memories of the great times he's had in these shoes. And so what inspired you to write that book, and then what are some things that you want readers to get out of it?
Well, that book, one of my sons in particular is a huge sneakerhead. So that always struck me that you could become so attached to your sneakers. And it was always a bummer for him when his feet would grow and he'd have to, get a new pair or whatever. But really what's behind that story is this idea of transition. Transition is hard for kids, for everyone. And, but in particular kids, even going from one classroom to another or one situation to another. And so this idea of using an object to talk about change and transition and how we can honor the old, but then embrace what's ahead was the kind of, underlying story beneath the sneakers. And the sneakers were a great vehicle to try to talk about that. So my hope is that through, reading that maybe it leads to conversations about loving things that have been, but then how you can also embrace what's ahead and sort of that little unknown gray area in between, and helping kids transition to different situations and different circumstances.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that it reminds me of and connects with me the most is that my son is that way in terms of fearing transition and trying to get used to something new. He's currently going into high school.
Good luck.
But he's still like attached to he finds sentiment in so many things, which I find so endearing. But then when it comes to cleaning his room, it's like, do you really need this notebook from 5th grade?
Right. Like, are you a hoarder really at this early age?
Right. So he's like, but maybe I'll need it. My teachers say that I might need it in high school.
Oh,
but this one, when's the last time you looked into it? And so like those transitional pieces and the things that we find sentiment in, and also like as adults, because sometimes we think in terms of change, we can think about all the reasons why it might not work.
Right, of course. And I think kids are still like, hopefully not quite as, looking at the potential downside, but they have that fear. And as adults, even as parents, and we watch our kids transition from one stage of life to another. I mean, yours is entering high school and he's like vacillating between being an adult and still being a kid, and how do we honor that and help, and and also then let it go for ourselves. Like, I
Absolutely.
miss those baby days. It's tough.
So I know you've written many books that feature diverse characters. So in your opinion, why does diverse representation in children's books matter?
I mean, oh, for so many reasons. But they talk about books as being windows and mirrors, right? So you see a new world and you see yourself. And if we're always looking at the same thing, we're not learning about. So everything we encounter in life then becomes the other, because it's something we haven't seen or explored before. And we live in a diverse world, and there are voices that need to be heard and supported, and things that we need to talk about and be open about. We need to talk about race. We need to talk about all these things. We can't just stuff them under I mean, how can you live like that? I mean, how can you live like that? So, and books are the way into all of these other worlds. And I think, there are topics that need to be talked about in books in terms of diversity, specifically race, specifically experiences of others. But then there's also a need to just have diverse characters doing everyday things, so that, again, there's not the other, there's the together, that we all share these experiences. And so we're in this life together. So I just think it's so important. This is how we cultivate empathy. This is how we cultivate connection. This is how we cultivate understanding. This is how we have discussions and ask questions, which is also okay to do. That's how you learn. But if you're not seeing images of people other than yourself, you're not going to ask questions. You're not going to think beyond your own little world. So it's just so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Have you seen any changes in the publishing world from when you started to now?
So from when I started, yeah, I think right now in this moment, I'm seeing the most momentum, the most opportunities, support, need, action happening in terms of getting diverse voices out there, whether they're working in publishing as editors and publishers and art directors, or as authors and illustrators. I think that there's real momentum. It was a little slow going from when I first started, but also from when I first started, I did notice, the first thing I noticed happening is this attention to who's telling the story. So, if I'm writing a story about an African-American child and I'm telling the story as though it's my experience, that's not okay. That I'm appropriating someone else's experience. And I did notice that there is more and more attention to that than there was when I first started. So that was the first thing I started to see. And now I'm seeing real kind of shift and movement, which is amazing and so necessary. Yeah, so.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing that too? I mean, I'm curious. I know it's an interview for me, but I'm curious to know what you're seeing.
I am starting to see that shift. And I know a lot of the conversation, it was around, like, do we see it in the editors and the publishers and all of these other behind the scenes to
even it's not enough. It's not enough. Right. But I think the urgency and awareness is building. So I'm hopeful. It should have happened, long ago.
Absolutely.
But it's at least there is some movement and awareness and conversation and exploration, about the importance and making these things happen, not just talking about the need.
Absolutely. And that's really where the work is, right? And like, what's the action? We can say we're doing these things, but then what are the actions that are going into place to show that?
Right. And I think we all need to find some way to take action. Like I can't just sit back and say, well, okay, this is great and I'll watch and see if the publishers are doing. No, I have to do my part, whether it's mentoring or bringing people in or doing, there has to be action at this point. It can't just be a sort of passive hope or letting other people handle it.
Right. One of the reasons why I thought about the Brown Boy bookshelf in particular was because even though there's gradually starting to be the ability to see more diverse characters in stories, but there was this wave of, okay, we need more girl empowerment books. We need more books of showing those images of female characters that are not the sidekick, that
Right.
are not
the trope, the stereotype.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think sometimes we go through like the pendulum's shifting. And so now trying to find those books about diverse male characters, particularly in picture books versus say the middle grades or the YA.
Right.
How do we make sure that our boys are also seeing themselves in those books as we start to make this shift into seeing more diverse characters?
I feel like it's interesting that we do tend to neglect boys, particularly on an emotional level.
Right.
And that's troublesome, because if we expect our girls and boys to communicate with each other, the boys have to be involved.
Absolutely.
And then there's the whole added level of boys of color, people of color. So yeah, there's I guess it does. So do you feel like now it's shifting more in that direction, or we're just still finding our way in terms of?
I think we're still finding our way. I think it's still slowly making a move, but I think part of the reason why I'm a little more sensitive to it is because having a son and then also seeing it in education play out in the same way.
Right.
So particularly in, early childhood and early elementary, you very rarely see male teachers. You may see them in like upper elementary, middle school, but then boys are always being taught for the most part by females. And so my son's first experience with having a male teacher wasn't until 5th grade.
Wow. It's crazy, right? I mean, I see it when I visit schools because I'm usually doing that sort of elementary age. And unless it's a gym teacher,
right.
It's typically female, everybody. Right. Yeah.
And so wanting to see, like, what are those images? Because they need to see them in their schools. They need to know that you can be a teacher. You can be, if we say you can be anything, then what does that actually look like?
Right. If you're not seeing an example of that, how are you going to know that's for real? So yeah, agreed, for sure.
So do you have a favorite book that you've written? Or maybe not favorite. I know
it's a tough one.
Favorite is like, who's your favorite child?
That's what I always say to kids when they ask me that. I'm like, it's like asking who my favorite child is. I get it.
But maybe one that you've connected with in a way that others you haven't.
I think right now, I think at different points in my career and in the world, different books feel right at that moment.
Right.
So for me right now, I think I Am Human is feeling like a book that's really resonating with me, with the time that we're in, with the values and ways of being human that we're trying to help our kids navigate, and the conversations we're trying to have. So in this moment, that's sort of where my heart is.
Okay.
It's a tough one. It's like the might get insulted if they hear me. I'm trying to keep it down.
When your kids were coming up, did you have any story time rituals that you practiced?
Yeah, I think, it was probably the same as many people. We had mostly it was bedtime. I mean, I read to them a lot, even when they were, schlumped in their boppies or whatever, and they, just couldn't even follow my finger. But, and I think a lot of that was also for me. I love the stories and I like to feel like I was reading to them. But once they got older and really, a little bit older and they started to really connect with stories and books, it was bedtime. It was the four of us would get together and read books at bedtime, and they had their favorites. And, there was the typical, do it and read it again, Mom. My son had a strange obsession with lions. So I had all these nature books and he would find the lion and then rip the page out of the book. So that was weird. But I think he was like fascinated yet afraid. So he would just try to deal with that. But yeah, it was mostly our bedtime ritual. That was it. There wasn't bedtime without the books. And I even tried to keep reading to them through middle school. Maybe not at bedtime always, but when there was an opportunity, even if it was a book they were reading at school, sometimes I would read it to them. So at least we could have that kind of experience together.
Do you have a favorite that you like to read to them?
Oh gosh. I'm trying to think. Well, my favorites were always Ezra Jack Keats, because I always felt like it was so much a reflection of growing up in the city, and we now live my kids have grown up in East Hampton, so in Eastern Long Island. So it's different than Manhattan.
Growing up in the city, right?
Yeah, but like all those characters, they just felt like so comforting and homey to me. What did we read? We read William Steig. We loved reading that. Mo Willems. I was just always collecting. So whatever was in the moment, that was kind of the author or the authors that we were reading. But yeah, I loved a lot of those kind of old school, like Marie Sendak and all of that. So those were fun. I'm sure I'm leaving out so many. I feel, and as I'm hearing myself say that, I'm recognizing that, well, those authors were mostly white males. And where were all the diverse books at that time?
Right.
Things have definitely come a long way since then.
Right. Because just think, Ezra Jack Keats was like revolutionary.
Yes, yes.
In creating books with this Black male character.
Yes. Oh my God.
In those times.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? It's a little bit crazy. And now, I almost wish I could, I still collect all the picture books that are, happening now. And I'm obsessed with Vashti Harrison. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
But I have them. Like, at least they're in the house and I'm reading them. I feel like maybe that's a step forward. But yeah, it's really interesting to reflect back and think about that.
Wow.
Yeah, and that wasn't that long ago. So my kids were born in 2003 and then 2005. And yeah, it's not that long ago.
Right.
We should have been a little more ahead at that point. We should have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, shame on us a little bit there. But
it's good to see that we're starting to make those.
Yeah, and that's why what you're doing is so important, right? So that the generations coming up it's not an unusual occurrence. The parents, who are raising these kids are now reaching for all of these diverse characters and stories.
Absolutely.
That's the dream anyway.
We'll see. We'll definitely see where we are 10 years from now.
Yeah, we should reconnect at that point and talk about it. For real.
Absolutely. So during these times, it really feels like, particularly for parents, really difficult with, virtual learning, schools being closed, trying to figure out how to not only support their children academically, but also emotionally and themselves.
Yeah.
During this time. Do you have any mindfulness tips for parents that you might want to share?
I will tell you what helped me. Well, in the beginning, I sort of lost all of my tools, and I really was just a ball of anxiety. Like everything was terrifying, and from what I understand, a lot of people went through that.
Absolutely.
But and even though I was a teacher, I certainly didn't expect to be teaching again, and certainly not high school. Like, kindergarten and high school, a very different curriculum. And in terms of mental health, I had one child who just went into a deep depression, and then I had to figure out how to help her through that. And so it was a lot. And I'm certainly not more than other people experience. I mean, so
Right.
much to be thankful for. I have a roof over my head. I have food. I don't take any of that for granted, but still really full of anxiety. So what helped me a lot, honestly, was sort of the things I said to myself. So first of all, breathing. When I would get really worked up, I literally would go like sit down somewhere and just take 3-4 deep breaths in through my nose, and just kind of like, okay, this is going to pass. We're right now we're okay. Science, DNA doesn't really matter right this second. Like, everything's okay. We're safe or whatever. And the other thing was kind of being easy with myself. Like, this is an unprecedented time in our lives. We are going to mess things up and get some things right and feel one way one minute and another way another minute. And the only way to get through that is to be easy on yourself. Is like, just tell yourself, in this moment, I'm okay. And that gets you to the next moment, and I'm doing the best I can. And, my kids are not going to, never get a job because this year didn't go so well. Like, those kinds of things, just, because it's hard to find, definitely having a community is so helpful. Other people but everybody's feeling so uncertain that the best thing you can do is kind of feel your feet on the ground, take a deep breath in, and just notice that in this moment, you're okay doing the best you can. And that's enough. So that would be my suggestion.
Which is so important, because with so much change, like we talked about earlier, how do you find ways to stay grounded and know that it's not just you changing, but the world is shifting, and so we will be okay.
Yeah, and I mean, thankfully there are community, like, you can look out there and see positivity. Like, things are crazy, nobody knows what's going on. There's a pandemic, people are yes, there's all these terrible, awful things happening, and we feel very unstable, but yet and still there is positivity. There are people making change. There are these powerful protests happening. There's a kid-lit community that's jumping into the world and talking to teachers, and we're supporting each other. There are people out there doing the right thing and doing the good work. So if you can find that can also help.
Absolutely. Because I feel like those are many things that have positively come out of this time, just right. In ways where we haven't had the space to kind of be still.
Now it's happening. Mm-hmm. Now it's happening, and it's important. So
definitely. Are you currently working on anything new?
Always trying to work on new things. We have actually, Peter and I have a new IM book coming out in September, called I Am One, a book of action, and it's kind of an activism book. It's so interesting because someone said to me, oh, you're timing these things so well with what's going on in the world. I'm like, I did not do that on purpose. These things were written years ago. It takes at least a year to get it. Who knew that the world would be this way? But it is coming out, and maybe, just in time for the vote, or just in time for people to understand that they can make change in this time. So hopefully it will resonate on some level, but I'm really excited about it. So that'll be September. I have a series of sort of feel-good fairy tales with a different illustrator, Jay Fleck. I had the Three Little Yogis and the Wolf Who Lost His Breath that just came out. And so there's another one coming, which is a Princess and the Pea story to help you sleep better. So just little things to help along the way. And then, I've got some other projects in the works. I'm not allowed to say anything.
Right.
It's exciting. So always trying. It's the one thing that's like gets me through. I mean, there are days when my brain is so cluttered and I can't write anything. But that's the time when actually the writing helps the most.
I was about to say, do you find this time that you're more creative, or is it harder to kind of get into that flow?
It comes in waves. You know, I think certainly when school was happening, that's where my brain was, and finding my own space and time. And typically I don't work from, even though I write, I don't like working from home. I usually sat in a Starbucks or something, or a coffee shop, and wrote, because it was out of my house, and then nothing was distracting me. And so it's, you know, been an adjustment to be working from home and noticing that, you know, there's laundry and there's dishes and there's this and that and all. There's a million things that I could use as excuses. But I think now that the kids have been out of school, I've had a little more brain space for myself. It comes in waves. I think it depends on what's going on in my home, with my children. And then, you know, I try, though, every single day, I try to create a routine for myself. I get up, I, you know, do my yoga or whatever, and then I give myself a few hours or a couple of hours to work. And now the kids see that, and so they give me that space. So that's really helped a lot, creating a routine. But again, it ebbs and flows with the state of the world and the state of the family and all of that.
Absolutely. What are you
I'm sure there are people who are just writing away, creating away, and I'm like, how are you doing that? But this is me.
Other authors I've talked to are going through the same process.
Oh, phew. Gosh.
So you are not alone.
Goodness, really, because I never know.
What are you currently reading right now?
Oh gosh, well, so what am I currently reading? My school, one of my son's school, as a result of what's been going on in the world, a group of parents have formed a diversity committee, and we're trying to change the curriculum and the way they're doing things in the school. And so as part of our own education, because many of us, the majority of the parents involved are white. And as part of our own education, we're all reading White Fragility. So that's been really interesting and important. And then my kids are reading Stamped, so I'm rereading that with them, which is one of my favorites. And then I have this book that I just got. I like YA and middle grade novels a lot, sort of more than adult things.
I do as well, so don't worry.
I'm reading what is it? The Children of Flesh and Bone. Is that the right title? It's so good. It's like a fantasy, I don't know, warrior thing. It's really good. And then I always have a pile of books on I read little bits here and there.
Right.
And there's another one I just got called Things Seen from Above, which is about a boy with autism and a girl. I think it's middle grade, and they're kind of how they become friends and his perspective of the world and things like that. So I like to read books that, you know, there's an issue, there's a neurodiverse aspect, or there's some other kind of real life thing going on, and how kids work that out. And
absolutely,
I think it helps me parent better too, a little bit. Books are really helpful in that way. I feel like there's so much room for story, because there's so many things that kids especially, but adults too, have to navigate in the world. And you can look at these things from so many different perspectives. So I never feel like, one book on a subject is enough. There's millions of ways to approach things. So there's always a book somewhere, or there should be, or there will be.
Right. I think that's the place that we hope to get to in media, where we can tell the same story and tell it in different ways and with different people, from different perspectives, to really be able to share, because everyone has, even in thinking about something that makes us, the same, we still have different perspectives. And
yes. And that's how we learn. And that's how we consider others. And that's how we maybe check the way we're looking at something and try something new, and maybe it works better. Like there's so much value to everyone's different perspective about the same human experience.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you so much for having this conversation with me. How can people get in touch with you?
So you can go to my website, susanverde.com, Verde, like the color green.com. And my email's on there, and there's a newsletter you can sign up for, and there's information on all the books and things going on in the world, and then, or in my world anyway, and then, because it's all about me. No, and then I'm on Instagram at Susan Verde, and Twitter also. I'm probably most active on Instagram, but I'm on Twitter, occasionally on Facebook, but it's all Susan Verde. So thank you for asking.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.